as well.
Right.
Read in there.
Okay.
Stuff. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So, thanks for coming.
Yep.
Let's get started with some opening up with prayer, and I'll begin. God, I pray that the talk I give here would positively reflect the church, and it would reflect what your desires are in all of our lives. Bless each and every one of these 8 people here, and I pray that the discussion we have would be beneficial to each of our spiritual journeys and our relationships with each other. In His name, amen. All right, so where do we begin?
What's your name?
I'm Ian, but I know all of you except for you two. But what do we know about what the Bible says about homosexuality, or what we think the Bible says? What have we been taught that the Christian church believes about homosexuals and homosexuality?
Oh, you want a response?
Yeah, that's why I asked.
That is wrong.
Yes, that it's wrong. In fact, the first condemnation of homosexuality was packed with that it was so bad that you would get burned at the stake if you were caught with another person of the same gender in romantic acts. Yeah, so here are some what the church believes. Right here, we have side B, which says homosexuality is okay. It's not a bad thing to have someone's homosexual orientation, but homosexual acts are what are condemned in the Bible. So you have to stay celibate, which means you can't be in a relationship ever. That doesn't change. There's side X, which a lot of people are even more familiar with, which is homosexuals can't be Christians without sexual reorientation. That's called the ex-gay ministries, Pray the Gay Away ministries, and reparative therapy, which is like a pseudoscience, which almost actually all, I can't find one that actually affirms this approach to life. And so, my opinion, I only recognize these two as actually a part of the legitimate church. And this is just something that's so destructive that I cannot, in my own life, associate that with the larger church. Again, I'm not speaking for the salvation of others, but that is what I feel. But I'm not going to dictate what God's judgment is. And here are some names you should know. Really quickly. My position is that side A, where homosexuality and homosexuals are okay. They're not condemned by the Bible, and there's no language in the Bible that would condemn loving, monogamous, and committed homosexual relationships. So this is me, and this is what a lot of other groups and churches believe. Here are some names to know. For me, the person I look to in this belief, that's side A, is Mel White. Mel White is a reverend. He's married. He went through side X. He tried to change his sexual orientation. It didn't work. He tried it for 30 years. Even got married, had a son. When he realized that he was just not going to change, he slit his wrists, but he managed to survive, and now he's in a relationship with another man, and is actually having a positive relationship with his ex-wife. Wesley Hill is the proponent for, the head proponent outside of the Pope. The Catholic Church does condone celibacy. He's one of the bigger proponents of side B theology, and this is Exodus International. There's no one person that is the proponent for side X. You have NARTH, which is National Association for the Research and Treatment of Homosexuality. You have Exodus International, and you have a subgroup called PFOS, which is Parents and Friends of Gays and Ex-Gays. And so that's side X. They're under a lot of scrutiny right now. But these two are pretty much on opposite ends as well. And this one's just even opposite of Wesley Hill.
Another question. Is Wesley Hill gay or straight?
He's gay. He's celibate homosexual.
Okay.
he actually comes to the Nazarene Church at least once a year, as far as I'm aware, and gives a talk. I want Mel White to come, but knowing how the head council of the Nazarene Church feels about homosexuality, and that is the side B approach, that will probably never happen until it has a political change.
Is Wesley Hill a pastor?
He's a theologian. He's going to get a master's in theology. I think this year or next. I'm not sure though. So.
Sorry, I have a question.
That's cool.
I have a question between the homosexuality is okay, homosexuals can't be Christians. What's the difference between those two things? Like when you're saying for side B, when they say homosexuality is okay, I'm just
They're saying
what that means.
they're saying homosexuality as an orientation is not condemned in the Bible. This one says that it is, and that all aspects of homosexuality are bad. This one says that you can have homosexual orientation, and that's not condemned. That's not bad. You're not a sinner for having homosexual orientation. But this one says it is. So it's just everything about you is just wrong. This one says half of what you want is wrong, but it's still
Is that more of where the tendencies come in? Where when people talk about homosexuality, it's homosexuality tendencies.
Yeah.
Is that side B?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So this is what the mainstream church believes.
Okay.
And I'm going to actually pass these out now. These are packets. These will go through the major points if you want to look through them. So.
Like a syllabus for a full course.
I know, but it's
Not a bad. Thank you.
There we go.
Sure.
I think that's one.
There's one.
Okay.
I like the wording on here. This church packet seems like homosexuality and a church packet. Sorry. Sorry. Never mind.
I'm confused. All right. Anyway.
Instead of
the church
packet.
space packet,
Oh.
it looks like almost homosexuality and the church packet. Like the
It's not a big deal, and I'm totally interested. Continue.
it's just funny.
Okay.
Sorry.
I don't. He's fine. So first, I want to approach the what the Bible talks about when people talk about homosexuality being condemned. The first part is Genesis 19, where you have where the angels come into Sodom and they visit Lot. A lot of times people will take the passage wherein the crowd that forms at Lot's house is trying to barge down Lot's door and trying to take the two angels and rape them. And so that is often used as this is a blanket condemnation of homosexuals, and that's why the city was destroyed, because they were homosexuals. Actually, if you look at Ezekiel 16:46 through 50, it never mentions, when the prophet is listing all the crimes of Sodom, homosexual orientation or homosexual acts aren't even mentioned. He does mention that they did abominable things, and there's a pretty good chance when he said abominable things, he was including rape of other men, and even women, I would assume, is included in abominable. And in any case, the usage of Genesis 19 is not a valid approach to condemning homosexuals. Also, Genesis 19, wherein you find that Sodom is the name of the city where homosexuals allegedly were. That city's name was used as a connotation for homosexuals. That's where you get the term Sodomites. More famously, though, you have Leviticus 18:22 and Leviticus 20:13 that say, thou shalt not lie with man as with woman. It is an abomination. I am the Lord. And so you have those two passages. You need some context into this. In 1821, you see the cult of Moloch condemned. Moloch was this sort of like sex god in Egypt, and what a lot of temple rape, a lot of prostitution, pederasty, which is affection for young children. It's pedophilia, pretty much. That was inherent in the cult, and you can also get a little bit more context in that Leviticus 18:3 starts with like a condemnation of what happened in Egypt with the pagan culture that the Israelites would have inevitably been influenced by, being a slave culture there for 400 years. So, like, this is one aspect which was connected to this pagan practices in Egypt that God was outlawing. It wasn't a general condemnation of homosexuals or homosexuality. It was condemning the act of making a man a woman, which at the time women were so despised that you could rape one and leave the next day and nothing would happen to you. And that's Leviticus addresses that injustice later on. But I'm not going to go into that. But women were so despised you could rape them, and making a man to be a woman was another sort of roundabout way of saying don't rape a man. That's abomination. That's an abomination. It's pagan and it's unethical, to say the least. So that's why you have those two passages in there. It's an anti-rape law.
So it's like, don't rape men because it's like making him social status like lower.
Yeah, that's making him like a slave. That's just so degrading and physically damaging, not to mention, that that's why the rapists were condemned, so to death. And you can see why there would be such a harsh reaction to that sort of action. And the next time homosexual acts are mentioned, it's Romans. Romans 1, 26 through 27. A lot of times what I'll get from a conservative are that, like, well, how could you possibly deny homosexual acts are sinful? I mean, it says it so explicitly in 1 Romans 26 through 27. There are 2 points to this. One, Paul would have been aware of some homosexual acts and homosexuality. He knew the word born eunuch. He knew what natural eunuchs were. Natural eunuch, which is this word in Aramaic, mahanah, which is used in Matthew 19. I'll get to that later. He knew what natural eunuchs were, and that was a natural eunuch was someone who was never attracted to women, making them like a eunuch because they couldn't have children because they were not interested in women. The term only applies to men. I have to clarify for that. He would have known about that. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know the Bible very.
It's okay.
Know all verses, but what does Romans 1:26 through 27 say?
It says, for even though they knew God, they did not honor
That's right
him.
underneath. Sorry.
Okay. Anyway, he knew that people had natural orientation, at least, given the cultural context and from what I've studied the past 5 years, 4 years, my bad. He would have known, that there were people who were attracted to women and who weren't. And so what he's talking about here is when they give up each other's, their natural way, and slept with each other. He's condemning heterosexuals who, in an act of paganism and debauchery, which was normal for Greeks and Romans, they would have exchanged their natural heterosexual orientations for homosexual acts, which were not natural for them. They were forcing something they shouldn't have been. And so he's condemning the outright orgiastic sort of culture in Rome, as you can see here. So that gives an explanation for First Romans, and moving along. Next we see 1 Corinthians 6:9 and 1 Timothy 9:10. This is where you get the term homosexuality. And oftentimes this is translated as homosexual offender, and that's not what it means. Homosexual, or homosexuality for that matter, was not a word until 1868. And in 1868 you had this man, he was a German, his name was Helmut Theilich, and he lived in Prussia. What happened is that, also he was a psychologist, Prussia passed a sodomy law, making homosexual acts illegal, whereas, as far as I'm aware, previously they were not, because the Napoleonic Code was introduced there to criminalize them. So Prussia was recriminalizing homosexuality. What happened was that he believed that there were people with natural homosexual or bisexual tendencies, and so he wrote a critique of this law, and he condemned it, and he said that there were people who had homosexual orientation, and meaning same-sex attraction, and that was when the term was first coined. And it didn't come to the United States until the 1880s as a word. It took some time to trickle down the sort of language network. So homosexuality wasn't a word until 1868, let alone like a unified concept among the academic community. So you have this word homosexuality, and it's translated in these two passages as from this word "koitai," which means man bed in the original Greek. The best translation you can get from this, because it's in the context, like, using the term man in bed, I guess I'm not a translator, and I don't claim to know Greek, but from what I understand is that from these two unified words, they associate to sort of negative connotation, in which it means perverse. Or perverted, or just plain out pervert. So, Homosexuality means pervert, and that's how it's been translated for a very long time. So, that, like, it wasn't until 1948 when I'm pretty sure it was in New International Version. I'm not certain on that, but I'm pretty sure it was a New International Version that introduced this word, pervert, and took it and made it homosexual. So that's why you look into these Bibles and you see homosexual offender in most of them. There are exceptions that translate it as like pervert, and even in the Renaissance it was translated as masturbating, because that seemed to like limit sex and its potential. For those of you who were here for Jared's talk during Sex and Dating Month. So that was the logic behind that translation. But the best translation we can get for Homosexuality is pervert. What makes this word even more difficult, though, for translation is that it wasn't really used in ancient Greek culture, or, Greek-speaking cultures. Honestly, like, the last time we see this word really used, and that I'm aware of, is in a 2nd century document from a Christian bishop to back to Greece, condemning men who had anal sex with their wives, a heterosexual act, and it wasn't. It had nothing to do with homosexuals. So there's reason why to believe like any translation other than like perverse, perverted, sexually immoral, which is porneia, and like the literal word for sexually immoral is porneia in the Greek. Like anything other than those like two words, and especially ones that any it's not a legitimate translation. You see that in the Bible, because this did not mean homosexual, and the word homosexual did not exist in the ancient Mediterranean world. It didn't exist until the 19th century.
Do you mean the word didn't exist? Or I mean, I would assume that there had to have been some kind of word to describe that.
Yeah,
because
you
like
had
the concept
this,
exists.
eunuchs. Latin and Greek and Aramaic both use, in all cultures, as far as I'm aware, in the Roman Mediterranean area, use like natural eunuch, born eunuch, meaning male homosexual. There wasn't really a concept for lesbianism or bisexual. Like
I was under the impression that eunuch was someone who was castrated.
that's in modern day, like that's a medieval concept. In the Roman era and in the Greek era, you had like this word in first century, like Judea. You had this word, and that meant it meant eunuch, but it meant natural eunuch. It meant someone who was never attracted to girls and was actually used, from what I see, exclusively, almost exclusively at least, for men who actually liked other men, like eunuchs who weren't interested in women. It also meant trusted ones, which is how we know it meant eunuch. And they also, this word is used apparently throughout the Bible. So, but again, I haven't read Aramaic, the Bible in Aramaic, and nor currently do I intend to. But Aramaic is on my list of languages to someday learn. So, then you see the word effeminate in certain translations of the Bible. They're starting to get rid of that word because it's such a stretch. But this word, you see the Bible say, nor homosexual offenders, nor the effeminate in 1 Corinthians 6:9 in certain translations. Effeminate also wasn't a word. It was a word, in all fairness, in Greek, but this isn't it. This word translates to literally mean soft. Like, and you could even use this word in ancient Greek to describe pillow. But in certain contexts, it could also mean corrupt. Like soft moral, soft just intelligence. It had a very negative connotation in certain, like if you used it in a certain way. So this means soft or corrupt. And so, any translation other than like corrupt. I mean, I guess you could put soft in, but it wouldn't make sense to put that in the Bible in that passage specifically. So, alcohol means corrupt, immoral, evil. So that explains these two Greek words. Like I already hit on this, so this is born / natural. So yeah, that is the, this pretty much takes care of like the New Testament clobber passages, which is the name of all the passages that are used to harm homosexuals spiritually. Even physically, some people use these passages as a license to kill. If anyone's ever seen the Kill a Queer for Christ bumper sticker, it's more common in the South, but these passages have been used as reasons to kill homosexuals. Now let's talk about the history of homosexuals being condemned in the church. You have this man named St. Ambrose. He lived in the 4th century. In the 4th century, and specifically in this year, 390, he was the Bishop of Milan. He had he was a part of the ruling authority there at the time. He also had Theodosius I, the Emperor of Rome, This is before Rome split into two separate entities in 395. Theodosius I was under penance to St. Ambrose for, what was it? He offended the church in some way. I forget the exact crime, but he was in debt to St. Ambrose, and specifically he was forbidden to enter the cathedral in Milan, which was Ambrose's archbishopric. And so Theodosius I wanted to get into good graces with the church, and specifically Ambrose again. In 390, there was this sort of civil unrest, this uprising of sorts in Milan in the Cisalpine area, which is the northwestern sort of clump in boot of Italy. Doing what many Christians, or Christians rather, did in this sort of era, they scapegoated. And this time, no one had really scapegoated the Jews much up to this point. They blamed eunuchs. And Milan at the time had this famous theater at this old pagan hall of Minerva. Paganism had by this time been outlawed in the Roman Empire. So theaters are traditionally centers for the neighborhood of homosexual life. And so when this scapegoating began, he introduced this law, or he told Theodosius I, and he strongly suggested that he prescribe all these born eunuchs that are disrupting the civil order in Milan to be burnt at the stake. And being that he was very strong in power, he got his wish. Theodosius introduces the first sodomy law in Western culture, and he begins this sort of, I wouldn't call it a Holocaust, but as far as homosexuals are concerned, it was bad enough that, the closet was created, and so there was a lot of blood, crucifying that day, because they were all being burned at the stake if you got caught. And the Catholic Church in general pretty much adopted this stance of kill homosexuals until, over time it went from, side X, or rather just die, to just remain celibate, which is nice leap there for the Catholic Church. I'm glad they're not prescribing anyone to death. And I do like Catholics. I like the Catholic Church. It does a lot of good. But this was not a proud point in its history. But this is the first known condemnation of homosexuality by the church. It came 360 years after Paul said anything. Because prior to, during Paul's era and after it, until this point, the only sort of same-sex interactions that were forbidden were pederasty and prostitution. That was all that was condemned by the church, and this made all same-sex interaction wrong and evil in the church's eye. So that's pretty much the story behind homosexuality and the church. Any questions so far?
When did the Catholic Church start? I don't really know the history of after Jesus died. When did
The church never was really unified after church died. It was, but it wasn't. It was in name, but let's be honest, they were sort of like we are now, only worse. You had hundreds of separate congregations ranging between several hundred and several thousand people, and they were very small because you couldn't congregate you couldn't be that big, otherwise you'd be caught. So it wasn't until Constantine came around and he legalized Christianity, and briefly he legalized all faiths, and then eventually he excluded it to just Christianity. That was in the 330s, and the Council of Nicaea, or Nicaea, I pronounce it Nicaea. I might, or I'm probably wrong. He got them all together, made a creed that defined what a Christian is, and he became like the Bishop of Rome, then evolved into the Pope. But while he was around, he was sort of like the acting head of the church, which is a tradition the Byzantines, so known as Eastern Romans, continued centuries later. And if the Byzantine Empire still existed, he would probably still be the head of the church and the state.
At that council, is that where they put the Bible together?
Was it?
I think that's the place out of which came the Nicene Creed.
Right.
I think the canon was formed over a longer period of time.
I thought the canon was formed in like the 340s or something.
It spanned a while before it actually took full form. I'm sure that group had a significant voice in it.
Yeah.
I'm sure Ian knows more than I do on that. So.
But you're the pastor.
Yeah, I know I am.
So you probably know a good bit too. As far as I'm aware, what the Council of Nicaea did, if it didn't already, if the canon wasn't already formed, then what probably happened is anything that wasn't like in line with the Nicene Creed, then it would have, just been rejected, and it would have been like unofficial condemnation of anything else. So that's why you had to reject the Gnostic Gospels. Yes.
So, I'm just trying to get this straight.
Yep,
So your position is that before St. Ambrose and the condemnation of all homosexuals in 390, you're saying that like before that, even with Paul and everything that he wrote, there was nothing against homosexuality.
There might have been, there was evidence for a sort of taboo, because
But you're saying as far as the church is concerned, there wasn't
There
like
wasn't.
an all right, all out.
yeah, and honestly, Rome also had a history of sexual liberation. So only within, I think, the Jewish culture would there have been any sort of like taboo attached to it. But as far as I can tell, there wasn't any like explicit criminalization of homosexuality, or I guess you could say Torah bashing.
So are you saying that after this occurred, that from here on, they kind of, so this was like the first one,
This was,
and then this set the tone for like ever? Is what
yeah,
you're-
for 1800 years.
Okay,
So 1700,
all
I
right.
guess. Anyone else?
How do you address people who believe in the translation of these verses as condemning homosexuality, but believe that it's that it's sort of like an application to an outdated society? Like there are verses, I'm not familiar with verses in the Bible, but like those kind of like about eating shellfish or like
Yeah,
associating them with
it's like a moot point, because when they try to compare those two things, like they have to understand that first of all, the forbidding of certain foods and clothes, that was only applied to Jews. First of all, it wasn't a Gentile thing, and also Christ came and you're right, that made it sort of like null if you're a Christian. I would say that's like a sort of uneducated approach to it, but I would have a discussion like, well, this is what I think about it, because like I would say that that approach still sets the tone for who our God is, and like if a God that condemns something that is completely natural and He created, there's evidence for that, then it sort of makes Him seem evil, and He's not. I would say that like that still speaks, if that's what you believe, it still speaks volumes about who God is, and it makes Him seem more hypocritical when He sounds all loving, but then He turns and says, wait, don't love this group. So I'm just saying that's sort of a hypocritical interpretation.
It's like a really commonly heard argument.
Yeah, it is, and I don't adhere to that, and I don't think it's like non-Christian. I just think it's like not like the same way I accept creationists, like as like I can accept them as Christians, but I still don't think that's like the most educated viewpoint. I don't think that's a fully informed viewpoint. So, I mean, still love them. Don't like get up in arms about it. It's like have a nice discussion with them and just move on. Not matter.
I just wanted your thoughts on
Yeah. No, I hear it all the time and I'm just whatever. All right. So no one else or all right, cool. Now I'm going to talk about some of the science behind it. Let's see. In 1975, or 1973 if you want to go earlier, 1973, the American Psychiatric Association delisted homosexuality as a mental disorder, which it had listed in 1942. Not for no real explicit reason, it was just sort of they wanted to. So they didn't have any studies to back it up. It was just a whim that they listed homosexuality as a disease in the 40s. And 30 years later, 29 really, they delisted it, primarily based on a lot of like Alfred Kinsey's findings, which was a 9-year study of sexuality and specifically homosexuality and humans. And so in 1973 they delisted it, and that set the tone for sort of a revolution with the name psychomedical community for the next 40 years.